Okay. Well, I think I should go ahead and at least start with introduction. So thank you for joining our peer review week presentation on identity in research infrastructure. So does identity matter in the systems that curate and host peer-reviewed scholarly content? I will be providing an intro and some thoughts on identity. So really an overview, setting the stage for Heather Staines to provide a presentation on identity as a continuum, affiliations, entitlements, metrics, and more. My name is Tony Alves. I'm SVP of Product Management here at Highwire Press. Just a couple of housekeeping items. As you heard probably when you entered, the webinar is being recorded and it will be shared after the meeting on our YouTube channel, and we will of course have a link accompanying a survey. You can enter your questions in the Q&A box, please, and then when we get to questions and answers, we will be able to have those nice and organized. And then just to note that we have another of the Highwire Best Practice Webinar Series events. It's opportunities to streamline workflow via preprints. If you caught the article that Highwire participated in the Scholarly Kitchen, this is not really a follow-on to that, but just more and more interesting, with many interesting, not more interesting, but many interesting presenters. And that's on October 13th. Feel free to sign up for that at any point. So I am going to go ahead and start. What is identity? Well, a Google dictionary definition is the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. I think, therefore I am, famously said by Rene Descartes. It points to the concept that identity, as it refers to a person, is intangible, but rather our identities exist in the mind, your own mind and in the mind of others. As we look through this list of what makes up identity, we can see that some of these are physical, some are chosen, some are imposed, and some evolve over time. Some of these things are human constructs like government issue ID numbers and political, religious affiliations. And some of these are unique physical attributes that contribute to identity only because we have pressed them into that service, like our fingerprint, iris pattern, and DNA. Some of these items, like my job, my hobbies, my networks, are things that I've cultivated and shape both who I am and how others see me. So where am I going with this? Well, down the path of obvious references, of course. If I'm quoting the dictionary and Descartes, then I must also quote Shakespeare. "'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's a Montague? It's nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo, where would he not, Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title? Romeo, doff thy name." So what's in a name? A thing that is usually assigned to a person at birth. It can carry a huge amount of meaning. For example, it might indicate gender. It might indicate ancestry, religion, or nationality, or all three. We diminutize a person's name when they're a child. So Eleanor becomes Ellie and William becomes Billy. This tactic can be used to make someone sound important, like introducing somebody as Mr. Anthony Peter Alves III, or it can be used to make someone feel small, like calling them Little Tony. And of course, our names can be used as insults, like Tony Baloney. Names are powerful things. Have you heard of the concept of the true name? The idea that if you reveal your true name to someone, they will have the power over you. There are various occurrences of this in literature, particularly in myth, folklore, and fantasy. In real life, think about the power invested in your signature. Your signature is a unique rendering of your given name, and it is used as a stamp of approval, a sign of authentication, a granting of permission, and forging a signature is a crime. So here is where I get to my point. Just think about how our name in the digital world is much like a true name in the fantastical world. Our name is almost always in our email address, and very often part of usernames, which we use to log into most systems on the internet. These are incredibly important uses of our name. They allow people to correspond with us, and they grant us access to resources. We're all bombarded daily with spam seeking to get us to confirm our email address and to trick us into entering a username and password. Like our signature, they are symbols of authentication, and like our signature, they can be stolen. Why is identity important? The most obvious is that my identity makes me unique. All of the things that make up my identity from the previous slide all together make me different from everyone else. I may share aspects of my identity with others. My gender is shared by roughly half the world. My nationality is shared by approximately 330 million people. But my fingerprint signature and social security number are theoretically individual. In the digital world, uniqueness is really useful and really powerful. A website that knows my identity can offer me lots of interesting things based on what it knows about me. Also, a website that knows my identity can make lots of money off of what it knows about me. When I'm on a website, before I enter any information, that website likely knows my rough location in the world and possibly knows what other websites I've visited, and therefore it might offer me some personalized services and usually some targeted ads of things I just purchased on Amazon. My identity gives me privileges. In our DEI-aware industry, it is assumed that I am in the most privileged class. But for our purposes today, in the digital world, my identity and privileges is less about race, gender, etc., and more about what I'm allowed to access online. By entering my username and password, I'm granted privileges into a whole world of things I can see and things I can do. I become part of the in crowd. I can do my banking. I can post pictures of my cats. I can read the New York Times, and I can tell Tucker Carlson what I really think. But what happens when I don't have a username and password? What happens if I can't afford to acquire or don't qualify to receive access I desire? What happens when I lack identity? Am I having an identity crisis? Well, sort of. In real life, IRL, identity can be a barrier to access to good schools, to good jobs, to safe living conditions. My identity might restrict where I can travel. It might force me to conform to rigid sets of norms. In the digital world, it's really the lack of identity that creates restrictions and prevents me from fully accessing all the benefits of society. Technology for managing identity. I've talked a lot about usernames and passwords as a means of authenticating identity, and of email, which is often used as a proxy, a username proxy. There are several other technologies that help to establish identity online. Some of these provide identity authentication, and some help preserve authentication once identity is established, and some protect our identifying data, and some assist in passing authentication along to other websites. Many of us are familiar with biometrics as a way to establish identity for the purpose of access. First, it was our finger on the smartphone button, and now it's facial recognition, requiring us to keep our cameras uncovered. IP authentication is a seamless, almost invisible method. This is when you gain access to a system because you are inside an institution that has access. The concept of single sign-on is well established and something anyone who spends any time on the internet really appreciates. The benefits of single sign-on include reduction of password fatigue, the time spent remembering and entering usernames and password combinations, and reduced risk of poorly managed passwords by third parties. Drawbacks include single point of insecurity and denial of access if the single sign-on service is down. Blockchains aren't just for cryptocurrency. Other uses of blockchain technology are for identity authentication and data protection. Without getting too deep into what is a blockchain, The touted benefits are that because a person's identity data is decentralized and encrypted, it is more secure. The blockchain enables everyone in the network to have the same source of truth about which credentials are valid and who attested to the validity of the data inside the credential without revealing the actual data. Authenticator apps are a fairly new technology. The idea is that the website or online system sends a message to your smartphone that you provide authentication so that you can provide that authentication on that device. And it's usually biometric. Similarly, there is dual authentication, also called two-factor authentication, which relies on a secondary system to provide proof that the person logging in is who they say they are. What happens is that when a user logs into a system, that system sends a text message or an email or even a phone call with a code that the user needs to enter as part of the login process. And one of my favorite authentication methods is the login link. No password required. Instead, you enter your email address, and if it matches the one on file, the website sends you an email with a link you can click, which logs you in. And I should note that Highwire does have an access and identity management product called Sigma, S-I-G-M-A, which you can learn more about at highwirepress.com. It offers centralized identity management, self-service administration, and single sign-on remote access. And that is our commercial break and word from our sponsor. So why is identity important for research? Looking away from identity authentication and access for a moment, let's take a look at some of the ways researcher identity manifests and some of the ways researcher identity is serviced. Authorship is perhaps on the top of the list, and much of what goes into identity management revolves around researcher output. Researchers want to be properly credited for their research. They want their research to be widely read. They want their presentations to be widely viewed, and they want their published works to be widely cited. Think about how researchers refer to articles when they are citing them. In an article by Smith et al., according to a report by Garcia and Kanumba, in a study out of Takahishi's lab, notice that they are not citing titles, they are citing people. Another aspect of researcher identity is related to identity management is website personalization. Although it may feel at times that you're being watched, personalized services in the form of content recommendations, convenient placement of services, quick access to recent searches, these can really increase productivity and efficiency. However, this sort of service relies on the website keeping track of your actions and of your interests. There are always privacy concerns, and it's good to understand what your rights are, how the website is using your data. GDPR in Europe has caused quite a headache for software companies, but it has really helped to rein in some of the data privacy abuses for everyone, which is a nice side effect of the World Wide Web being worldwide. There are various initiatives and products that use researcher identity to provide services that connect, promote, disambiguate, clarify, and reward researchers. Platforms like LinkedIn and ResearchGate provide forums for community where researchers can intentionally exchange information and where artificial intelligence can fill in the gaps by surfacing information on profiles and user behavior. Google Scholar does similar things. It's less profile oriented. ORCID, which stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID, is a nonprofit that provides unique persistent identifiers for researchers and others involved in scholarly communication. These IDs provide a means for researcher disambiguation so that researcher identities don't get jumbled up together like the people behind me. Credit, another useful non-commercial initiative, which stands for Contributor Role Taxonomy, serves researcher identity by providing a way for researchers to make clear what role they played in any piece of scholarly output. For example, were they involved in conceptualization of the study, organizing the methodology, writing up the research? Res Cognito serves the researcher identity by crowdsourcing recognition of researchers by other researchers. A commercial startup, Res Cognito's vision is an open environment where researchers and research professionals are recognized for a wide range of behaviors and contributions that benefit the open research ecosystem. It draws on other identity-focused services like Credit and ORCID to build its recognition platform. Convey, developed and marketed by the Association of American Medical Colleges, is a global financial and relationship disclosure platform. Convey serves researcher identity by aggregating information about researcher funding sources and provides the researcher with a platform for declaring conflicts of interest. I spent most of my time talking about what identity means, why it's important, and how it can be managed. The topic of researcher identity is complex and multifaceted. Just now, I touched on researcher identity and how it's used by websites and how researcher identity is being serviced by different organizations. I will now turn it over to Heather Staines, who will provide a much more practical discussion of researcher identity, how the institution is utilized, with a focus on providing researchers access to content and resources, regardless of where they are in the world. So, Heather.
Thanks, Tony. That was an amazing lead in. I definitely learned a lot about identity, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. I'm really excited to be here today. I am happy to see so many familiar names among the participants and also many new ones as well. As Tony mentioned, I'm a senior consultant with Delta Think. Half of my time is spent as the Director of Community Engagement on our open access data and analytics tool. My commercial will be, I'll drop a link to a webinar I'm doing next week on that tool. I've thought a lot about identity in two projects that I've been working on since last fall. So coming up on the 1-year mark are ones I'm going to tell you a little bit more about today, but I also want to kind of cast that a little bit more broadly within identity. Tony's driving the slides for me. So next slide, Tony. What do you need to know about me? Well, that depends. You might want to know my institution, my name, where I am in the world, what I'm entitled to, my ORCID ID. Next slide.
Whoop, did I go one fast, one too far?
Yep, that's okay. Why would you need to know those things? I can't remember what was on there, but there we go. You may want to know my affiliation to drive entitlements. As Tony mentioned, different personalization items or preferences that I may have set, saved items. You may want to know what are my typical behaviors. This stretches out into the consumer web that we participate in all the time. We've all been followed around by that weird socks ad for something we bought for our uncle 3 years ago. You may want to know what the context of my access is. Am I the author? Am I the peer reviewer? Am I a reader? And you may want to know what I have the ability to do within a site that permit those types of permissions might determine whether I'm an admin, whether I'm a manager, whether I'm a single user. Lots of complexity around those these days. Next slide. So what I want to talk to you about briefly is an introduction to Seamless Access. Next slide, please. So Seamless Access is a coalition of 4 founding organizations initially, NISO, the International STM Association, Internet2, and Géant. And it's a community-driven effort that supports seamless access, thus the name, to information resources, scholarly collaboration tools, and shared research infrastructure. Next slide. So why might you want to implement seamless access? Well, ties in nicely from a lot of things that Tony said. Right now, there's a number of different messages that might be conveyed via publisher sites. No two tend to be the same. And we want to be able to ensure that we can streamline this function by saving information about a user's institution in their local browser to limit the number of times someone would have to log in, to ensure that trusted service providers alone have access to this type of data, and basically get folks to the research that they need. Next slide, please. The goals for seamless access are to improve that user experience. When users are not on campus, as we know, many times now, users are not going to be on campus. So we want to make sure that they will enjoy that same streamlined experience they would if they were within that IP authenticated range. We want to ensure that the Identity Federation infrastructure and standards continue to evolve and develop to meet these changing needs. We want to help the campus response to security incidents and make sure that site-wide disruption that happens in cases of abuse can be limited. Next slide, please. So seamless access makes it more seamless. This is an example from a recently enabled publisher with seamless access. That's Institute of Physics. And here I've zoomed way out so you can see a user has landed on an abstract page for an article. They're not on campus, so they're not immediately recognized. At the bottom there, on the left side, and I'm going to zoom in on a second, you see access through your institution as one of the options. So let's go and take a closer look on the next slide. So when a user is not authenticated, they will see the seamless access text to access through their institution. They have other options as well. Next slide. If they do choose access through their institution, I apologize, a little bit of a blurry screenshot at this resolution. They will see now recognition, New Jersey Institute of Technology. They have the option to add or change their institution if they have multiple affiliations. There also is an opt-out process the first time you go through the authentication flow. If you do not want to be remembered, if you choose that option, you will be prompted to go through the authentication flow each time. Next slide, please. Here's a list of the current publishers who are participating in seamless access. The founding 5 publishers, which include ACS, Elsevier, Springer Nature, Taylor and Francis, and Wiley, as well as a number of additional publishers who have recently become integrators, including, I think, our newest publisher here, which is Emerald Publishing Group, which went live last week. You see there are different levels of integration you can participate in. There's more information about that and the documentation on our Seamless Access website, and I've got a link to that. And the website also has, in this deck as well, links so you can see how the different integrations are on those publisher sites. Next slide, please. Our experience tells us, and we've been able to participate in quite a lot of user experience, that the more options a user has, the more confused they are about their next step. Listen to that. The placement of the button, the Seamless Access button, matters. We have great UX specialists, and so they've gone through a lot of testing. The details around the language of the button, which are in the documentation, definitely matter. And the whole experience, including the identity provider discovery, matters. The documentation is extensive, but if you have questions, you can contact us and we will help walk you through the process. Now let's move on to Get Full Text Research. Next slide. I found that a lot of people tend to be confused about Seamless Access and Get Full Text Research. I will admit, a year ago, I was too. Think about it as seamless access is used in cases where the researcher is out of place in the wild, off campus. Whereas Get Full Text Research is really designed for when the content searches occur not on the publisher platform. So the content searches are initiated out in the wild. So GetFTR accelerates the discovery and access of authoritative and trusted research. You see on the right side, the same 5 publishers that were active in getting seamless access off the ground also are key in underpinning GetFTR and its initial funding. The intention of GetFTR is to get the user to the best version of the article that they are entitled to and send them there through a single smart link. We want to maximize the number of articles that the user can get signaling on their entitlement by combining information from a number of different sources. We want to improve that user experience as well and remove the friction in the authentication process. Next slide. So what happens behind the scenes? And this is a critical point. We tend to think that everything must be a button, and indeed, Seamless Access is a button. Get Full Text Research currently does not appear on publisher sites as a button. Where it does appear potentially as a button, which I'll show you, are on discovery services, social collaboration networks, and other places where researchers start their content search. So what you see here is our researcher. She's going to her favorite go-to platform. She's putting in her search terms, and behind the scenes, the GetFTR API is doing a real-time entitlements check based upon her affiliation. It's returning batched responses, 20 DOIs at a time, to her search results that are populated, giving her the signal that she will have access to open access and subscription content that she's entitled to. Then she can get directly to the full text of her article. Next slide, please. So GetFTR benefits the research community as well as publishers. I've mentioned that it's intended to increase visibility and usage of content and promote the version of record. Publishers spend a lot of time enhancing the version of record, so we want to make sure that users who do have access can get there. As I mentioned, it supports both open and free to read and subscription content. It simplifies authentication, so there should be a smaller number of abandoned searches, fewer instances where folks are hitting a paywall when they shouldn't. And we want it to reduce frustration and keep people from going to unauthorized content sites. Publishers have some options when they're setting up GetFTR. They can either direct users to the PDF or the HTML as they prefer. GetFTR does support IP-based as well as federated authentication. Publishers do have the option for unentitled users to send them to an alternative version. This is something that's in the testing phase right now. That alternative version might be an author-accepted manuscript. It might be a read-only version of the content. It could potentially be a preprint or a truncated version of the content. A number of those are in testing now. I get a lot of questions about turnaways. Publishers do use turnaways for good intel on where they might get a lead for their sales team. And I will say that there are lots of reasons why a researcher may still go to your site, even if they know that they will not get to the full text. What they have is information on what that path is going to provide them, exploring the abstract and the like. So turnaway information, will still be available from your site. Next slide. I'm going to say that all the way through now. So here's an example of a couple of ways that integrators, where GetFTR does appear, are experimenting with their UIs. And you see on the left at the top there, the little GetFTR indicator with the green bubble filled in, which indicates that a user will be able to get to the full text. On the Mendeley example in the upper left, on the hover over state of the view PDF, there's an indicator that the institution does have access to the article. Moving across the top to the right, we see dimensions. And in that case, again, in the hover over state, the view PDF button will pop up information around user entitlements. The second two examples on the slide lower left are the researcher app, where they've actually overwritten the URL with the GetFTR smart link, including the indicator alongside it. And then on the lower right, Semantic Scholar, which has added an access via your institution with the GetFTR indicator. So a number of UI options that an integrator can choose. Next slide, please. So adoption is strong and growing. GetFTR does want the broadest possible participation of publishers and integrators, and that particularly includes publishers who are also integrators that have ANI or other aggregated products where they might benefit from having the GetFTR links that point folks back to their content and beyond. It's currently supported by Adapon and Silverchair with Highwire and KGL Pub Factory slotted for the next couple of quarters. Currently, with the publishers that do participate, we are covering about 50% of all the published scholarly articles. So it's a nice cross-section there. We have welcomed quite recently 2 new publishers, AMA and Rockefeller University Press. Across the bottom, you can see the integrators where GetFTR is currently live, as well as some of the integrators and publishers that are coming soon. In the center there, we've provided some analytics about how the monthly entitlement requests, which are listed here in the millions, continue to grow over time. We tend to see a really steady growth. We do fluctuate a bit with the academic school year, but we're very happy with how this is playing out. Next slide, please. So having talked a little bit about how identity and authentication work within the seamless access content and the Get context and GetFTR context, I just wanted to broaden out a little bit more in my thinking around identity, particularly in the world of OA content. Many of you know that publishers have done a number of things that they might not have done because they have licenses with libraries that say you must do these things. I'm big on digital preservation, for example, and that's something that libraries have pushed more and more publishers into doing. OA publishers do not tend to have that type of relationship with libraries on a regular basis. And so getting open access publishers to think a little bit more about these types of initiatives has been a little bit of a challenge. OA publishers have information, of course, on where their users are coming from, but they may not have the same information that they could report back to their library partners. What kinds of impacts do social justice movements have around user identity? Publishers, particularly in the OA environment, are interested in looking at and reporting back to the wider research community where content can be accessed and by whom. And there are definitely efforts by authors as well as publishers to expand accessibility to content on a global basis, particularly to lower and middle income institutions and folks from those countries that may not ordinarily have access. So knowing more information about your users can be important in that context. The impact of COVID has been an interesting case study in the terms of this environment. As some publishers learned when they first opened up subscription content early on in the pandemic, if there wasn't any type of registration process involved, they couldn't necessarily track that usage back to an institution. So not only were they unable to follow up in an orderly way, as they would tend to do with institutions where researchers are interested in their content, but they weren't able to internally have the type of data that they might be able to analyze to improve their services moving forward. What types of data you have definitely tell you different things. I also sit on the Counter board of directors. We've been talking a lot about uptake of Counter, particularly around open access publishers, which tend to lag behind their subscription and hybrid counterparts. There's some interesting articles that you can take a look at online, which compare Counter usage versus Google Analytics. I would say you're going to different sources of data to tell you different types of information. I've been really excited as I joined Delta Think to be able to work more closely with data. And so I've been thinking about this, on quite a regular basis. So I'm looking forward to, in the questions section, maybe delving a little bit more into who wants to learn what, for what purpose, and what are some of the potential implications of those efforts. Thank you. Oh, my next slide is my identity slide, just to close out. Ways that you can get in touch with me. Don't be confused. You can email me at any one of these email addresses or give me a shout out through any other of the communication channels, and I'm happy to sort out your request.
Thank you very much, Heather. Thank you for that. So people should be able to see both of us now, I think. And if there are any, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the question and answer box, and we'll get to those. But I do have a few things that I'd like to talk to you about. Have I stopped sharing? Is that yeah? Okay.
Yes.
So, what is it about these projects that you, Heather, find so compelling?
Gosh, way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I participated in an ISO project around single sign-on, establishing suggested practices. Another time. The NISO project was establishing suggested practices regarding single sign-on, and then I happened to name it, so I thought of it as my baby. It was an early attempt to try to regularize how single sign-on messaging would appear across different types of sites. We published that recommended practice in 2009, and mobile was hitting around then. The project was too far along then to really go back and take mobile into consideration. And we were missing a key player at the table. We didn't have the federations involved. We had the libraries and we had the publishers involved. And so it really sat there, and I was sad to see that happen, but very excited when a project that was known as RA21 developed out of a number of different pilots to try to look at these, single sign-on and identity and authentication issues. And some of the work that we did around Espresso was picked up, and with involvement of the federations this time. So putting the projects in a nice foundation to move forward. So having the opportunity to do publisher outreach for first for Seamless Access and then quite soon for GetFTR I was excited to pick up that torch again. I also thought a lot about identity when I worked at a startup back in the sort of 2012 timeframe, SIPEX, which looked at providing course materials. And one of the things that was important in that project was the context of the user, enabling instructors to assign content and know what their library had already paid for versus having some sort of insight into pricing on a per user basis. I think identity only becomes more complex over time, and we wish we had this, right? We feel both that sites know too much about us, but also they don't know the things that we want them to do, to know. And one example, which probably has crossed everyone's minds in the pandemic, is I would like to know which streaming apps I have access to through things like my phone service, through my internet service, through the fact that I'm a member of a group or affiliated with a particular organization. That's the kind of thing around identity that would be tremendously useful for me now. So we all, benefit from and suffer from this kind of complex understanding of identity.
Yeah, I mean, sort of sticking with that point there, the desire of content providers to understand an individual's usage of their content to better customize the experience. The libraries are well known for protecting user information. They don't give out information about what books and resources their patrons utilize. So how are libraries collaborating with content providers in this way?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting time because a lot of the privacy provisions and best practices are front of mind for content providers. We all had to scramble a few years back for GDPR and the California laws, and we're looking at potential future changes around browsers, no third-party cookies and things like that. Which means it's great from a privacy standpoint, but from the perspective of libraries that want more intel on what different parts of their campus are doing. It hasn't necessarily been, such a great development. There are libraries that have been discussing and are currently discussing partnerships with content providers. This tends to, I think, happen a little bit more frequently in the course material space for e-textbook providers. In that case, it's a value proposition, and with moves towards things like open educational resources, uptake, and removing barriers around content, become all that much more important. We talk a lot about data privacy and ethical use of data. We actually have a workshop coming up at CSE that's on this topic. So if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend that. I think the key is being open and transparent with users about what kinds of data will be collected and what it will be used for, and what sorts of safeguards are in place if that data will be used within the library, if it's going to be used by the Office of Teaching and Learning, if it's possible that the publisher might be able to use that data to provide personalized experiences. I think as a collective, I hope, are more attuned to what data is being collected and what we might be comfortable having that being used for. How long will that data be maintained? What are the guidelines for where it might be shared? Opening the door to that kind of transparency, does raise a lot of questions. So it's not a simple undertaking to potentially put one of these initiatives, in place. If you're a library, and you may have to go through their institutional review board. If you're a publisher, you may have to check with your legal team. But the information that can be learned through the ethical use of this type of data can be really valuable in developing, a better user experience, as well as new products and services that might sit atop platforms now.
So that's really helpful, useful information. Libraries and institutions want to be able to track their users so that they know what resources are being accessed, and publishers want that information also. How granular does that information need to be really for them to make it useful for the libraries and for the publishers? At what level can they drill down to make it useful?
Yeah, I think that you need to ask those questions at the outset. What you can collect are probably going to be, is probably going to be limited by the systems, that are in place. One of the things which I thought would be really interesting to explore, but I'm not sure all systems have, the ability to do this, is giving libraries insight into undergraduate, even potentially lower freshman versus sophomore versus junior, senior access to content, graduate level access to content, faculty and staff access to content. Some of the decisions that are being made around right sizing subscriptions or providing access to content through alternative delivery mechanisms like interlibrary loan or document delivery or something like that. There may be constituencies on campus that have more time sensitive content needs than others. That's a challenging granularity to actually get to, at the end of the day. I think more, probably in more instances where campuses have IP that might be delineated by college or by different schools on campus or different campus locations, having insight into that type of usage. This is a tool for the law school, for example, or this is a tool that's really intended for community college access if you're part of a statewide consortia. Those types of things may be a little bit simpler to get access to. So thinking at the outset, what are your questions? Really talking to your service providers to find out what's possible and what's not. I think service providers would like to get some of those things potentially on their roadmap if they're going to be useful down the line for institutions and can help with business development around new products and services.
So we have a question from the audience, and this kind of digs into the seamless access. How does Google Casa work? Is it the same as seamless access?
So I knew I should have put a slide in, which actually talks about the differences. I believe, and you may be more of an expert, Tony, than I am in Google Casa, but that you do need to get the Google Casa to work in the first instance to be on campus. So I believe that does require occasional kind of touch base on campus to really make that connection that you are still affiliated. That's not necessary with GetFTR, or Seamless Access. You're directed through an authentication flow where you can select your institution and provide your credentials. Some of the other differences, for example, like we get questions about KBART, files, and this is more on the GetFTR side. GetFTR is a real-time entitlements check, so there's no manual work involved on the part of libraries, and we depend on the publishers. They're going to have the most up-to-date information on entitlements. So if you're talking about, newly subscribed content or recently published content, that up-to-date information is going to be available through that entitlement search. So it takes the manual part out of the equation. We also do utilize some caching. It's a very minimal amount of time for subscription content. I think it's a week, and 2 weeks, or maybe a little bit longer for open content. It's refreshed frequently, but that is a performance issue on the system, and so that's going to get you your results much more quickly.
Yeah. Yes, specific to CASA, which stands for Universal Campus Activated Subscriber Access. It does require you to have sort of begun your work at an institution, and then it remembers that you were there, I think, for about 30 days. So I had, fortunately, taken some notes on that earlier. So it's great.
That's great.
Oh, good. So, let's sort of stick a bit with the focus on Seamless Access and GetFTR. So they're big, ambitious initiatives. What has compelled the investment of time and resources in these projects?
Yeah, if you think about the challenge that these projects are trying to overcome, which is researchers not being on campus and searches for content not starting through the library, it's not going to be something that one publisher can hope to solve for every researcher in every part of the researcher workflow. Like projects like Crossref, projects like NISO standards really require many different constituencies to be around the table. And so it's heartening that the publishers came together to start, these initiatives. Both are affiliated with a new division of the STM Association called STM Solutions, which is really intended to look at these tough technology challenges that publishers can't really solve on their own. Somebody had remarked in the chat that the links were way too subtle. The indicators are way too subtle. Hopefully we can surface that in our GetFTR indicator implementator. I can't even speak. It's Friday. Our integrator workshop that's going to be happening, and we learn so much. I referred a couple of times to the user testing that has been undertaken by Seamless Access, And I think the largest number of access options that were displayed, and I will not throw the publisher under the bus, was like 11 options. And our users, when they kind of talked through, they had no idea which of the 11 options that they should click on. There's no common signaling that they can learn. We're just at the start of these initiatives, and so it's going to take a little bit of time for researchers to recognize what the GetFTR links and indicators mean, as well as the Seamless Access button and how that's going to help them across, as it's persistent across the different participating publishers. So I think it's a great thing to see publishers working together. I will also say that we have library advisory boards for both projects. These have been built out with the input and with the considerations of the libraries. That's something that we definitely want, to continue. So it's intended to get those researchers to the best version of content. It's intended to keep them from having to go through and constantly remember login credentials. We all know how frustrating that is. And I'll, think of the TV streaming apps again. And so I think the more we move forward in the complexities around content, the need for collaboration around publishers is just going to increase.
Right. So we have a couple more questions from the audience, and I probably should have mentioned earlier that the first question on CASA was asked by Christina Ashby. So Richard Getty asks, how does Seamless Access know when I cease to be affiliated with an institution?
So when you go through Seamless Access, I'm assuming that you're not logged in on any of the publisher sites, where the information could have persisted from. You are diverted through a login flow. I wanted to keep the number of slides here to a minimum, but we do have longer decks as well as videos available on the Seamless Access site that can provide you a little bit more information. But Seamless Access is strictly around the menu of institutions that you select. Your authentication still happens initially through your campus. So it will persist, for a time, I think a matter of a couple weeks, but then you will need to go through another flow. And if you are no longer affiliated with your institution and they have taken you out of their system, then you will not be successful through that flow. So I would say it's the same as when you're removed through any other login mechanism, that you would ordinarily confront with your content.
And Judy Luther asks, how does GetFTR verify the user's affiliation with the institution?
So it's a similar answer. And I will say, Seamless Access and GetFTR can be used together, but they can also be used separately. So GetFTR uses that same local browser storage after you have been successfully authenticated through your institution. And so it's a similar, user flow. GetFTR does also work with IP authentication. So if you are within the IP range or you're using an institutional proxy, that will be successful in that case as well. So no sort of top secret, magic or anything going on, although it may seem like that if you're a researcher that, sees those barriers fall away. Authenticated that first time, that persists. And moving forward, depending on how frequently you access content, you keep that authentication going if you're a frequent user, but that will go away if it's been a while since you've been in there.
We really only have 2 minutes left, it looks like, and I think people will start dropping off. So do you have any final thoughts or points that you wish you had already made?
That's a tough one. Just think about, we should all be thinking about, our identity and our privacy. Do those privacy checks and updates that we tend to say, remind me later, remind me later, remind me later. You may want to actually set aside some time to do that. And if you have feedback on GetFTR Seamless Access or questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And if you just want to chat about, privacy, around identity and user behavior, you know where to find me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That'd be, change up those passwords every once in a while, right? And make it even more difficult for yourself. But
yeah, I will say I did have to have a serious conversation with my parents recently. They did not have PIN numbers on their telephones. And they said, that's okay. We don't do anything that's sensitive with our telephones. And I said, you have your email on them, right? And they said, yes. And all of a sudden, they finally understood why they should have PIN numbers on their phone. So I consider that an identity success for me lately. So if you've got parents out there without PINs on their phone, you may want to have a little chat with them too.
Yeah, my parents are the same. They don't have any PINs on their phones, and I've explained to them, but
you put a little fear in them. That's what I did.
Great. Yeah, just like my mother used to. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Heather. This has been a lot of fun, and I really love these two initiatives because it does make things easier. Usernames and passwords are a real annoyance, and anything that makes it easier for researchers to access content is important for all of society. So. And thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you very much, Allison McGonigal O'Connell, for being in the background and helping make it work. And thanks again, Heather. So we will close this out.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.